It all starts with a question, a gap between what we know and what we don't know. And it's curiosity that makes the urge to fill that gap compulsive. I grew up on a dairy farm just outside Nantwich. As a young girl, I used to help my dad collect the cows for milking. And I was fascinated by the cows' behaviour, watching them follow that same path back through the field every day to the milking parlour. Walking at the same steady pace, they would fall into line, filing along their well-worn, self-made tracks, compliantly waiting in line to be milked. I was curious about how they followed that same pattern every day, twice a day, creatures of habit. Throughout my life, I've always been fascinated by human behaviour and how we work. As a schoolgirl in 1986, I made 3 wishes for the future. One of those wishes was to live until I was 200. Can you imagine? Because I wanted to see how the world changed. I was curious, still am, about where we're heading, what we're learning, and what we're not learning fast enough. Day to day in life, I'm an explorer. I love discovering new things, a different route home, a great book, or an undiscovered country pub. And I'm intrigued by what makes people tick, our stories, passions, and motivations. I'm curious, what energizes you? And how is that different from the person who sat right next to you? What's holding you back? And how is it that sometimes we end up falling in line, just like the cows? Curiosity is a natural drive, much like hunger or thirst. We're all born with it. So why, as adults, do we have a tendency to pull back, stay safe, and move away from anything that's too far outside our comfort zone? Fear undoubtedly plays a big part in this, but so does complacency. It's as though we reach a saturation point in life where we've experienced so many things that we somehow assume we know enough, and we settle back into our familiar, well-worn tracks. Complacency is no friend of curiosity. Like a muscle, it needs flexing. So I'd like to ask you something. Bring to mind your favourite comfy armchair. You know the one. Or maybe it's the spot on the sofa that's yours. I'd like you to imagine that you're settled into it right now. Notice how it looks and feels. Notice what you can see around you, familiar objects. Why is it that you always choose to sit there? How do you feel when someone else is in your spot? And what would happen if you mix things up a bit? My dad's favourite armchair was his recliner, a huge brown 1980s chair, fabric worn and tatty, but oh so comfy. The chair creaked and groaned when Dad kicked it back to relax, and with a further push, he was fully horizontal and ready for his nap. Despite my mum's best endeavours to get rid of that chair, Dad hung on to it for years. It was battered and frayed, screws were loose, and bits were falling off. But it was comfortable and familiar. 10 years ago, I found myself stuck in my armchair. I'd fallen into one of those comfortable ruts at work, doing the same thing, day in, day out, operating on autopilot, really not enjoying it, but not disliking it enough to do anything about it. Stagnating, hanging on, telling myself I was staying for the money, the benefits, the security. All good reasons, I thought, and then something happened. I had a moment of realisation, a wake-up call. Someone at work who I respected told me that I'd lost my spark. They said my energy used to light up a room. Now it didn't. My first reaction was shock. Shock that someone had even noticed this. For in my mind, I was just getting on with things, being normal, I thought. Was it that evident that I'd lost my spark? I felt crushed that I'd allowed it to happen, and sad that I wasn't me anymore. But after the hurt had worn off a bit, I picked myself up, and in my mum's words, got on with it. I began to get curious about what exactly my spark was. I'd never thought about it before. I wondered where it had gone and how I was going to get it back. Instinctively, I began to write a list of everything I was good at, enjoyed, or had ever been interested in. I got it all down in the back of my notebook. It was a really random list. I had no idea where I was heading with it, but I allowed myself to be okay with not knowing. And instead, I got curious about what could happen. It felt so good to be making small steps out of that rut again, and it was the start of a fantastic adventure. Marcel Proust said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in seeing with new eyes." So I chose to sit in a new armchair, and I viewed the world differently. I stuck to one rule and one rule only. I followed what interested me. It was great. I enrolled on courses, I read books, watched videos, joined groups, and connected with a whole new world of people who were curious about learning just like me. I immersed myself in the process, and flexing my curiosity motivated me to learn in all areas of life that were meaningful to me. So I delved deeper into human behaviour, beliefs and attitudes to change. I was curious about potential, how little of it we actually use, and how we often find ourselves settling for situations that make us unhappy because we think we have no choice. In truth, there is always a choice. A choice to choose how to look at a situation. A choice to view it a different way. A choice to move armchairs. Here's something that will make you smile. Did you know that on average, a child can ask up to 100 questions every hour? 100 questions! Is that all some of you are thinking? I bet many of you as parents, me included, get impatient by the endless stream of questions. Some days it feels like it will never stop. But what's surprising is that by the time children start school, that natural sense of wonder is already starting to escape them. Answers are often more valued than inquisitive thought, and curiosity simply trained out of us. Can you imagine if adults ask questions at the same pace as children? It would be exhausting and completely unrealistic. But we must beware the opposite end of the spectrum. For when we don't ask enough questions, when we lose interest, when we settle back, we risk losing our spark. And we find ourselves saying things like, "I'm too old for that. It's not really me," or "I can't be bothered." William Ross said, "Every man dies, but not every man really lives." So how would you feel reaching the end of your life, sat in your armchair, looking back at how it all went? Did you do that stuff you were curious about? Did you find and follow what really interested you, no matter how big or small? Or did you settle back and think, "I've got plenty of time, I'll get round to it next week"? I want to challenge you to get out of your armchair, to literally and figuratively see the world with new eyes. Go and find your spark. It's what makes you, you. Life is a great adventure, and there is no better time than now. Do you want to stay safe, Or do you want to explore? Thank you.